Okay everyone, now we're going to move on to mapping on a client. So it's really important you take your time with your mapping, as this is going to be your guide before you start microblading. Now this is my lovely client Nicole. Before we actually start the mapping process, I need to assess Nicole's features. So I can see that she has really good brows already. I'm going to get her to smile for me. Raise your brows and frown. So she doesn't have a lot of movement in her brows, but you will find that some clients, maybe if they're a little bit more mature, will have a lot of movement. They may also naturally hold their brows in a certain position, and that's something you need to work around as you're mapping. Some clients will also have Botox, so you'll find that they have limited movement within their face. It's ideal that a client has this done prior to having their brows done, but if they were to have it done afterwards, then they need to leave 2 weeks between each treatment. Another thing that we need to assess before we start mapping is the client's sitting position. Now, it's very common that the client will naturally slouch as they are sitting. That is totally okay, but you need to make sure that they're sitting up nice and straight and that their head is facing forward. You will find that sometimes clients naturally have a bit of a head tilt, but you need to have them facing straight ahead so that their brows are nice and even as you're working. So now that I've assessed the brows, I'm happy to get started. I'm going to give the skin a wee clean with some alcohol spray just to remove any debris or any oils that are sitting on the skin, and this will also help remove any makeup the client may be wearing beforehand. Perfect, so quite happy that the skin is nice and clean. Now I'm going to pop my white paste on the back of my hand. Now we're using white paste as it's really easy to see on the skin, so you'll know exactly where your lines are and where you're meant to be going. I just pop a wee bit of this on the back of my hand, and I prefer to wear gloves just so it doesn't stick to my skin. And then I'm going to use some thread to mark down my points. All I'll do is snap the thread off, hold it in my hand, and then apply it to the thread. Okay, so our first point to place down is going to be our centre line. Now, the centre line, you can measure to the client's hairline or the centre of their nose. Some people's nose may be slightly off centre and they may have a very accurate hairline, so it's totally up to yourself depending on the client where you're going to place this. When I am placing it on the skin, I'm just holding it nice and tight and pushing it down. Your lines don't have to be really heavy, you just want to be able to see it. So I'm going to get her to sit up nice and straight, head straight forward, perfect. And I'm going to measure this to the tip of her nose. So I'm happy with that, I can see where it is and I know exactly where I'm going. Now we're going to move on to the A points. So your A points are measured by the bridge of the nose. Now, luckily Nicole has really great fronts to her brows, and I would say that they actually sit really nicely. Sometimes you'll come across clients whose brows are quite wide and maybe the front part of their brow sits out here. With those clients, you're still going to bring the brow forward, but you maybe wouldn't bring it as far forward as the bridge of their nose. It really depends on their natural features. But as I said, with Nicole, I am going to place it where the bridge of her nose is. She did mention to me before that she accidentally took off part of the front of her brow, so I'm going to take that into consideration as well. And she'll probably find that she has a wee bit of space there that I'm going to fill in with the microblading. So, again, holding the string nice and tight. Now, if you ever come across lines like this and you've accidentally made them a bit wider than you'd like, you can take a micro brush. These are really good because they're small. And your wipe it lotion that we give you. I like to use this to clean up, so I'm just going to take a little bit of that on the back of my glove, not too much because I don't want the skin to actually feel wet, and then you can tidy it up. Now, only do this if you feel like the thicker line is going to get in your way. If it's a little bit wider and you feel like you can still work with it, don't worry about cleaning it up because you're just giving yourself more work to do. So I'm happy with those A points. Now we know the A points are in the correct position because there's equal space between the centre line and both of my lines. If you had an accurate centre line and you felt like you had more space on one side than the other, you know that one of your A points is off and you would need to assess that and change it depending on which side was wider. Now we're going to move on to our B point. So when you're measuring the B point, this is the height of the brow. Some clients do have a natural height to their brow, and if you don't want to change that, you can just go with it. But if you look forward, Nicole, the area that you're going to work within here is between the iris and the outer corner of the eye. So we call this the safety zone. It's the white of the eye. And it's basically, as I said, from the iris to here. So any of this white area, you can place the B point in anywhere there as long as it suits that client. So Nicole does have a natural high point to her brow. But if I stand directly in front of her, I feel like this side's a little bit higher, so I'm actually going to choose to go with that brow. So I'm going to mark this one down first. If the client has lashes on or quite long lashes, don't worry about that, you're not going to hurt them at all. Place it down and lift. Now I can see where that is, I'm not going to go in again, but if you felt like you wanted to, then you can. And I can see that it's probably sitting closer to our iris than the outer corner, so I need to take that into consideration when I'm placing down the other one. Always have your client looking straight ahead. Perfect. So I'm quite happy with those. I feel like they're sitting in the same area on each side, and they're sitting on where her natural high points are anyway, so that's totally fine. And then the last part is the C point. So the C point is measured from the very corner of the nose up to the corner of the eye. Now you have room to play with this. If the client had really natural lashes, you can also measure to the lashes, but I personally 90% of the time go with the corner of their eye. And what you're going to do is you're going to hook your thread around the corner of the nose, up to the corner of the eye, and place your thread down. And you can see when I hold that there, her brow actually naturally sits there anyway. I wouldn't really want to extend her tails because that would probably look quite unnatural, and what it would do over time is it would drag the eye down as opposed to giving her that nice lifted look. So then I'll do the other side. And you can see from those points, the points are sitting in the same place, but this brow is actually just very slightly longer naturally than this brow. So I'll take that into account when I'm doing the microblading. So now I'm going to move on from the thread and start using our magic brush. Now the magic brush is amazing for this because it is so thin and it's easy to pat your lines down. So I've got my white paste on the back of my brush. It's such a small detail, but it's actually really important how you apply the paste to the brush for getting the crisp lines. So I do already have a wee bit on, but what you need to do is go side to side with your brush and just take your time. Now you can see how thin that is. That means that my brush is in the correct position, I've got enough paste on, and I can get started. When I am actually drawing the lines down, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be connecting my A point to my B point, then my B point to my C point, and I'm not going to be swiping, I'm going to pat down my line. Patting it down gives you far more control as opposed to swiping. Swiping, I find it's a little bit harder to get a really crisp line, and you're going to make a little bit more of a mess, which gives you more clean up afterwards. So if you pat, then you're going to find it a lot easier. Now I'm ready to connect all of my points, so I'm going to have Nicole sit up nice and straight and have her face forward for me. Now when I'm doing this, I'll go between having my client's eyes open and closed. I do like when people have long lashes to have them closed, but it's important that halfway through I get them to open so that I can see their natural facial expression. So if you close your eyes for me, Nicole, pop your chin up very slightly. Now luckily Nicole doesn't have much growth underneath. If a client did, don't be scared to go over the hairs, because sometimes you are going to have to do that, especially if their brow drops a bit lower, or if you want to raise it, or if you want to work over growth that they've got in the tail area. So don't let that panic you, just go with what you think's right at the time. So I'm going to position myself. I like to stabilise my hands on the client's face and then just begin. So I'm going to hug the brow. And I'm just patting along. Now line doesn't need to be really precise when you do it. Obviously you don't want it to be really thick so that you've got loads of cleanup to do, but remember you can use your micro brush and the wipe it if you need to sort anything or clean it up. So that's my A to my B. Probably will clean this area up a little bit, but I'm going to go ahead and connect my B to my C before I do that. Great. Now, before I continue, I am going to thin that line out. So, just taking my micro brush with the wipe it again. And just go really slow when you do this. I feel like if you work fast with the white paste, turn your head very slightly just for a sec. If you work fast and try to wipe the white paste, it does smudge. So just do it little by little. So that's fine for now. I can always go back if I need to. Normally I do find once I've done both of the brows, you do need to come back in at this brow a little bit. I might map this side and actually incline it a bit more or decline it a bit more or whatever I've done and feel like I need to tweak this brow again. Just because you've done this brow first doesn't mean that's the be all and end all. You can go back and adjust things. So I'm quite happy with where that line's sitting for just now. Now I'm going to go and do the top of this. Now, for her brow, I probably am just going to come along and hug where her natural hair is because she doesn't want anything too unnatural, or wide. So I'm going to start around here. You can close your eyes for me. If you feel like your brush is getting a wee bit wider and you need to thin it down again, then just go back and forth. Don't worry if a client has long hairs like that, you can pat over them. And then I'm going to connect her B to C. So I'm quite happy with that. Now that I've done her full brow, I'm going to get her to look at me. Smile for me. Perfect, so her brow isn't moving, so I'm happy with the positioning of it. I am now going to open up the front, so I'm quite happy with where my lines are stopping. I'm going to take away that front line. We do this and open up the fronts because we find that when a client sees the brow and it's blocked off like that, they find it hard to imagine what the brow is actually going to look like or where it's going to stop. So by taking that away, it's easier for them to have a look at the end. And then I'm just going to go back in and neaten up that bottom line a little bit. Great, so I'm happy with that, and now I'm going to go on to the other side. Now what we're going to do is measure our heights over to the other brow. Now don't be concerned if at the moment your brow is looking a little bit wider, that's totally okay. Don't forget that you're starting your strokes on this bottom line and pulling them up to the top line. You also need to consider the fact that the strokes do shrink over time, so they are naturally going to look a little bit longer when you very first do it, and then they'll shrink during the healing. In saying that, you don't want to make your brow crazy wide, but if it does look a bit wider, don't panic. So again, taking my thread, I've just took a fresh bit and putting a little bit of white paste on. I'm going to measure my height. Now I'm going to measure out the bottom line so that I know where to start this brow. And then I'm going to measure my top line. And these are just guiding lines for you to use so that you know where to start on the lower and upper line. So now we're going to do exactly the same thing, but on this side. I'm going to give the brows a little brush. Now, if you are right-handed, you're going to have to reposition your hand here. It's quite easy doing this side, but what you're doing is you're just keeping the same hand position but swapping it over, and it's easier to hold your brush with the point facing inward as opposed to holding it like this, in my opinion, but just do whatever is more comfortable for you. So again, putting some white paste on my brush, making sure it's nice and thin. And then starting at this measurement here. And what you want to do as you're doing this side is keep going in front of the client to check that you're going at the right incline. You don't want one of your brows going really, really inclined at one side but then flatter at the other side. You need to make sure they're going in the right direction. Now again, luckily Nicole's brows do naturally do that, so I have quite a good guide. I'm not having to change anything, but if you were restructuring the brow for your client, that's something you really need to be aware of. And I just take my time on this side. As I said, I'm right-handed, so it will take me just a little bit longer. So I've connected my A to my B, and now I'm going to do my B to my C. And again, stepping in front of the client so you can make sure that you're going in the right direction. I'm just going to make my line a little bit more noticeable. Making sure at all times that my brush is super thin, just so my lines aren't too thick. And this was her brow, if you turn your head away from me slightly. That was a little bit shorter, so I am bringing it down a little bit further than her natural hair, but that's what's going to make them look more even once they've been microbladed. So I'm happy with that lower line for just now. Now I'm going to go on to the top again. As I'm doing this, I'm going to make sure that I'm constantly going back and forward, checking the height of this one. If your client has quite long hairs at the front, you can just move them out the way as you work. So this side is quite rounded, so I'm going to be very cautious that I'm not making this too pointed at the top or too arched. I do want to have that nice curve. Okay, so now that I've put all the lines down, again, I'm going to step in front of them. I do feel like I'm going to need to make a couple of tweaks that are nice straight for me. Now, if you're looking at the brow and you're not too sure if they're the same heights, one really good trick is getting a clean bit of thread, so you don't need any white paste on this, and just placing it on one brow, so your highest part of the brow, and going along, and you'll be able to see if they are the same height or not. So that'll be straight for me. So I'm placing this on the upper B point of the left brow. You need to make sure that your thread is straight for this. Yeah, so they're the same height, but one thing I do feel is that I've made the top of this brow just a little bit straighter. Now personally, I quite like the incline that I've got going on this brow, so I'm actually going to change up this side. But before I do that, I'm just going to clean up some of my lines. So again, taking my micro brush. And just take your time. I feel like the worst thing that you can do when you're mapping is try and rush things. If you rush, you won't pay attention to the little things that need altered in order to get the best shape for the client. I'm going to step in front of her. Yeah, so looking at that, I definitely need to bring this just at a little bit more of an angle. You can see, as I said, there's just a little bit more of an incline. It's very, very small, but that's something that if I went ahead and tattooed this, that she would really, really notice once it was all done. So I've opened up the front of this brow and I'm totally happy with this. As I said, all I'm going to do is incline this very top line of this brow a little bit. Don't need to do anything to the tail area, literally just my A point to my B point. And as I said, once you've done both brows, you will notice things like this. Just because you've finished this side doesn't mean it's the be all and end all. You are going to need to make little tweaks to perfect them. So I'm going to go directly in front and just start lowering this very slightly, more so just straightening it. I'm going to need to do some cleaning up after this as well, just to take away part of the line I created previously. And I know from measuring prior that my height is the same. So now I'm going to thin this out from the top, using a wee micro brush, and my wipe it. I'm going to take away these lines here now that I've lowered it. And just continue cleaning up until I'm happy. So that's a lot better. So now I've got a bit more shape in this area, as opposed to it being too straight. You've got that nice soft incline, and it is the same as this side. So I'm going to take away the middle line. I don't need this anymore. And just take away any smudging. You don't want there to be loads of smudging all over the client's face, because when they look at it, they're not going to understand why that's there. So it's unnecessary. Just take it away and make sure everything's nice and clean. And now that I am finished and I'm happy with it, I'm going to get her to look at me, smile, raise your brows. Perfect. So everything's totally fine. I'm going to take away these lines again just because I'm done with them, and it's going to make it easier for her to understand the shape of her brow. When you're taking away all these lines though, do not change the shape that you've already created. You want to be very, very careful you're not altering it at all, because then you're going to have to go back in and fix it up. And any hair that is out with your drawing, you're going to tweeze away before you start. Don't do this until your client has okayed the shape, because they might want to keep some of the hair. Obviously, it's down to you as an artist to say if they can or not, or if it's going to be incorporated within the brow, but don't take anything away until they are 100% happy and you're both in agreement. Okay, so now on our side, we have finished the mapping. Just to recap what we've done, we measured the centre line, which needs to be in line with either the tip of the nose or the hairline. Your A points, which for the most part should be in line with the bridge of the client's nose. Then we did the B points, which if you look forward, sit in the white of the eye wherever you deem necessary for that client. And then your C point, which comes up the corner of the nose to the corner of the eye, and that is where your tail stops. Once you've measured all your points, we connect A to B, B to C, lower and upper brow, measure out the heights in between, and then repeat on the brow afterwards. We're now at the stage where you as an artist are happy with the mapping. You've shown your client, they have no worries, they're completely happy with the shape. You've then laid them back, done any tweezing and threading that needs to be done. What you would then do is set this down with powder, so that when you're doing your microblading and you're stretching the skin and touching their face, it's not going to wipe away. And then that is you ready to get started.